Don always prided himself on his ability to read people, his detective instincts sharp enough to unravel the most complex of cases. At 45, he had earned his reputation, his 2 decades in the force a testament to his dedication. But recently something had shifted within him, a nagging doubt, a creeping uncertainty. Don couldn't help but wonder if his career was slipping away from him, not because of any failure, but because of something he couldn't quite define. The promotion he had been hoping for seemed like it was moving further out of reach, and as much as he tried to focus on the job, his attention kept drifting back home to Helena. The tension had been building for months, unspoken but undeniable. His marriage, once a source of pride, now felt like a weight he couldn't shake off. The late nights at work had become more frequent, and Don found himself choosing the case files over conversations with his wife. And Helena? She had always been the glamorous, confident woman who walked into a room and commanded attention. But lately, Don had noticed a change in her too, a distance in her eyes, a coolness in her smile. It wasn't something he could put into words, but he felt it, a sense that they were both drifting apart. As he sat alone in his car that evening, staring at the city skyline, Don realized how much time had passed without him truly noticing the cracks in their relationship. Helena was no longer just his wife, she was someone who had become a stranger in his own home. There was something in her gaze now, a look that made him uneasy, as if she were holding something back. And Don couldn't help but wonder if his neglect had led her to seek something or someone else. He thought about his career again. He had always put the job first, but what had it cost him? What was the point of climbing the professional ladder if the foundation of his personal life was crumbling beneath him? The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He might be on the verge of losing everything: his career, his marriage, his family. But how had it gotten this far? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing: he needed to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. Helena had always been the woman everyone admired. At 42, she was the epitome of grace, a stunning blend of beauty and confidence. As a former model, she had spent years in the spotlight, adored by many, envied by others. Her image was perfect, her life enviable, but beneath the surface, things were far more complicated. For all the admiration she received, Helena was plagued by deep-seated insecurities. She had always felt like she was living in a shadow not cast by Don, but by her own past. The model who once captured everyone's attention had long since stepped out of the limelight, now confined to the role of wife, mother, and employee in a corporate world that felt like a far cry from the excitement she once craved. The transition from glamour to routine had been gradual but profound. She had married Don young, and though she loved him, the years had worn on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The woman who once ruled photo shoots and high-profile events now spent most of her days managing spreadsheets and attending corporate meetings. Her beauty remained, but it had become a tool for others to admire, not something that gave her a sense of personal validation. And in the quiet moments when she found herself alone in their home, Helena would look in the mirror and wonder who she had become. She no longer recognized the woman staring back at her. Her life with Don had once been filled with passion and promise, but the years had dulled that connection. She found herself craving more excitement, more attention, more validation. And that's when Eric Spencer entered the picture. Eric at 30 was everything that Don wasn't: youthful, vibrant, with a sense of purpose that had reignited something in Helena. It started innocently enough, with casual conversations at work. But over time, the spark that she had been searching for began to kindle between them. Eric made her feel alive again, reminded her of the woman she used to be, the woman who was desired. The guilt that she initially felt was easy to dismiss. After all, it was just a little harmless attention, wasn't it? But soon, it wasn't just about attention anymore. It was about something more, a deep yearning she hadn't realized was there. Helena tried to push the thought aside, telling herself that nothing was happening between them. But when she looked at Eric, when their eyes met in those fleeting moments of shared understanding, something inside her told her that things had already gone too far. She had already made the decision this weekend away with Eric wasn't just an escape, it was a chance to confront her desires and her needs. And as much as she hated herself for it, she knew she was on the verge of something irreversible. The discovery hit Don like a thunderbolt, unexpected, sharp, and painful. He had been picking up on the signs for weeks now, small moments that hinted at something more than just a busy work schedule or an innocent friendship. It was the late-night phone calls, the lingering glances when Eric's name came up in conversation, the way Helena's eyes brightened whenever she spoke about him. But it wasn't until Don overheard a conversation between Helena and a colleague that the truth slapped him in the face. It was late one evening when Don came home earlier than usual from a shift at the station. He wasn't expecting Helena to be there. She had mentioned she was meeting a client for drinks, but the soft murmur of her voice reached him as he approached their bedroom. He paused, listening for a moment, and though he couldn't catch every word, the unmistakable tone of excitement in Helena's voice made his stomach churn. "Yeah, it's settled. We'll head up Friday evening. Just the two of us," she was saying. "I think it'll be good for me. For us, really." The blood drained from Don's face. Friday evening? Just the two of them? The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Eric, the weekend getaway, the last-minute trip that seemed so out of place in their routine. Don's heart raced as he stepped quietly into the room, where Helena was packing a small bag. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and as he stood in the doorway, she froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening. "I didn't expect you to be home this early," Helena said, her voice betraying a flicker of unease. Don swallowed hard, fighting back the surge of anger and betrayal bubbling within him. He took a deep breath before speaking, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're going away with Eric, aren't you?" The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had been avoiding. Helena hesitated, her lips parting as if she were about to say something, but then she closed her mouth. The realization in her eyes told Don everything he needed to know. She hadn't been careful enough to hide the truth, and now it was laid bare before him. "I was going to tell you," she began, but Don could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry. Not really. And the guilt he had expected to see, her remorse, her shame, wasn't there. Instead, there was a mixture of defiance and something else, something he couldn't quite place. Don didn't know how to process the flood of emotions coursing through him. Betrayal, hurt, anger, they all collided in his chest, making it hard to breathe. But as much as he wanted to scream, to demand answers, all he could manage was a whisper. "Why, Helena? Why him? Why now?" The weight of Don's question hung in the air like a cloud. Helena could feel the tension between them tightening, but she knew she had to be honest. As painful as it was the truth that had been eating away at her for months, and she couldn't keep hiding it anymore. I don't know, Don," she said softly, her voice wavering for the first time. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her thoughts. "I've been trying to figure it out for so long, but I don't feel like myself anymore. Not with you. Not in this life we've built." Don stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to continue. He didn't understand. How could she say this? How could she just admit that everything they had was nothing? "I love you," Helena added quickly, her voice thick with emotion, "but it's not enough anymore. We're just going through the motions, Don. It's like we're both walking in circles, pretending everything's fine." The words cut deep. Don felt as though the ground beneath him was slipping away. The woman he had loved, the woman who had been his partner through thick and thin, was telling him that their marriage had lost its spark, that their years together, everything they had built, meant nothing more than a routine to her. I thought we were happy," Don said, his voice breaking. "We used to be so good together. What happened?" Helena closed her eyes, her face creased with the weight of her confession. "I don't know, Don. I don't know when it happened, but it did. I'm not the same person I was when we first met, and you've changed too. We've both changed, and it's not anyone's fault, it's just life. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like something was missing. And when Eric came into my life, when he made me feel seen again, I couldn't ignore it." Don felt his world shatter. Helena's words, though honest, were like daggers to his heart. The realization that she had been seeking someone else's attention, that she had turned to Eric to fill the emptiness, was more than he could bear. But even worse was the underlying truth: their marriage had become an afterthought. She had sought excitement outside of it, and now there was no turning back. Her eyes met his then, and for a brief moment Don saw the vulnerability that had always been hidden behind her perfect exterior. "I don't know what to do, Don," she whispered. "I don't know if there's anything left for us anymore." The silence that filled the room after Helena's confession was suffocating. Don stood frozen, as if the weight of her words had trapped him in place. His mind raced, thoughts collided and tumbled over one another, each one more painful than the last. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to piece together mysteries with calm precision, but nothing in his years as a detective had prepared him for this moment. His own life, his own marriage, was now the case that needed to be solved. "Helena." Don's voice cracked, but he fought to keep it steady. "Is it just excitement that you're after, or is it something more? You're telling me that you love me, but you're planning to spend the weekend with Eric. You're telling me that we've lost something, but what does that mean for us?" Helena looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The guilt was evident on her face, but she didn't look ashamed, just tired. She had been carrying this secret for so long that it had become an almost unbearable weight. She had convinced herself that this was her last chance to feel alive, to recapture the spark that had once existed between her and Don. But now that it was out in the open, there was no turning back. "Don, it's not just about Eric," she said quietly. "It's about me. About feeling like I've lost who I am. I don't want to hurt you, but I'm drowning in this marriage that has become a shadow of what it used to be." Don's heart shattered. He had never imagined that Helena's words would cut this deep. They weren't just about a simple affair, they were about an emotional rift so vast that it seemed impossible to repair. He had spent so many years focusing on his work, on his career, that he had neglected to see the slow unraveling of the woman he had once adored. The woman who now sat in front of him, torn between the life she had built with him and the life she was tempted to pursue with someone else. He swallowed hard, trying to suppress the anger rising within him. "Do you love him?" he asked, the words tasting bitter as they left his mouth. "Do you love Eric?" The question hung in the air like a cloud, heavy and charged with a desperation that Don couldn't hide. He needed an answer. He needed to understand if the woman he had loved for so long had truly moved on. Helena's eyes flickered with uncertainty, a brief flash of doubt crossing her face. I don't know. I don't know if it's love, but I feel something. And right now, that's more than I can say for what's left between us." Don's chest tightened as he tried to process her answer. It wasn't the confession he had hoped for. There was no remorse, no apology, just a painful honesty that made the truth even harder to face. "You're going to go through with it, aren't you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're going to leave me for him?" Helena didn't answer, but the silence between them spoke volumes. In that moment, Don knew deep down that their marriage was hanging by a thread, and he wasn't sure it would survive the weight of the truth. The conversation took a sharp turn as the tension between Don and Helena grew thicker. The harsh words they exchanged had created a rift between them, but now something deeper was at play. They had been avoiding these issues for years, small cracks that had been covered up with silence and distractions. Now the truth was spilling out, and neither of them knew how to stop it. "I didn't realize how much we've both changed," Don said softly, his voice raw. "I kept thinking that everything would work itself out, that if I just kept working hard, kept doing what I knew how to do, things would go back to normal. But maybe I've been fooling myself. Maybe I haven't been the husband you needed." Helena was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the floor as she absorbed his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with emotion. "You weren't the problem, Don." "I was," she admitted, her words coming out in a rush. "I've been trying to fix things in all the wrong ways. I didn't know how to talk to you, how to tell you that I was feeling. empty. And then I found myself looking for something outside of us, something to fill that void. Don's chest tightened as he listened to her. There was a sense of finality in her voice, like she had already given up on them, even if she didn't want to fully admit it. But I should have said something earlier, she continued, her voice trembling. I shouldn't have let things get this far without telling you how I felt. I've been keeping secrets, Don, not just from you, but from myself. The revelation hit Don harder than anything else she had said. The realization that they had both been living in a fog of unspoken truths for years was almost too much to bear. He had been so focused on his work, so consumed by the demands of his career, that he had failed to see the cracks forming in their marriage. And now it felt like those cracks had become chasms. I've been trying to figure out what went wrong, Helena confessed, her eyes brimming with tears. And I think part of it is that we've stopped making decisions together. We've stopped talking about what we both need, what we both want. I've been making decisions on my own, and so have you. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. Don had always believed in solving problems through action, through hard work. But this was something different. This wasn't a case to be cracked open with a few well-placed questions. This was a relationship that had been fractured by years of neglect and miscommunication. For the first time in years, Don felt the full weight of their distance, the emotional chasm that had grown between them. And it was clear that both of them had contributed to it, in ways they hadn't even realized until now. The moment of truth had come. Don sat in the silence that followed his last question, his body rigid, as if waiting for the earth beneath him to crumble. Helena's response was slow, hesitant, but as her gaze met his, Don saw a depth of confusion that mirrored his own inner turmoil. She wasn't the woman he thought he knew anymore, and yet, there was something in her that he still recognized, a part of her that had been lost in the mess of their years together. I don't know how to explain it, Helena began, her voice wavering with an emotion Don hadn't expected. Vulnerability. I've always loved you, Don. I thought that was enough. But somewhere along the way, things changed. I changed. And I think I've started to feel something for Eric, something more than just friendship, and it scares me. Don's stomach lurched at her words. She had admitted it. She had feelings for Eric. The man she had mentioned in passing so many times, the one he had always assumed was just a colleague. But now, the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just a fling, it wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. There were real emotions involved. Helena, Don's voice broke as the pain of her confession settled in. How could you? How could you let it go this far? Helena's eyes welled with tears, and she wiped at them quickly, trying to regain composure. I never meant for it to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt you. But I've been so lonely, Don. Not just physically, but emotionally. Eric, he made me feel seen again. He listens to me. He understands me in ways that you don't anymore. And it's not your fault. I know you're busy. But I started feeling invisible. The weight of her words crashed down on Don like a freight train. He had always been there for Helena, hadn't he? He'd provided for her, supported her, loved her in every way he knew how. But somewhere along the line, that wasn't enough. The silence between them deepened as Helena's confession hung in the air. I still love you, Don, she added, her voice filled with a strange mix of sorrow and regret. But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when I'm not happy. I can't keep living like this, and I don't know how to fix it. The reality of her statement hit him like a slap to the face. She had feelings for someone else, and yet she was still holding on to him, still clinging to the idea of their past, even as she reached for someone new. The conflicting emotions were impossible to reconcile. Love and betrayal, affection and neglect, all twisted into a painful knot. Don felt as though his heart was being torn apart, piece by piece. Helena's love for him, if it could even still be called that, was no longer enough to hold her back from someone else. And he realized, perhaps for the first time, that their marriage had truly reached its breaking point. As the conversation wore on, it became painfully clear to both of them that the foundation of their marriage had crumbled beyond repair. What had once been a partnership full of dreams, laughter, and shared ambitions now seemed like a distant memory replaced by distrust, unmet needs, and a growing chasm of resentment. Helena stood by the window, her back to Dawn as she stared out at the city lights below. The silence in the room was deafening, filled with unspoken words and unshed tears. Dawn remained seated on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched in his lap, trying to hold on to whatever remnants of their relationship he could salvage. But deep down, he knew it was futile. "I don't think we can come back from this," Helena finally whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned to face him, her eyes red from crying, but there was a finality in her expression that told him everything. "I don't want to keep pretending. I don't want to live in a lie anymore, Dawn. I need something real, something that makes me feel alive again." Dawn's heart cracked. He had always imagined that, no matter the storms they faced, they would find their way back to each other. He had never truly considered the possibility of them parting ways. But now, with the weight of Helena's words, he saw the truth: their marriage was beyond saving. There was too much hurt, too much betrayal, too much bitterness between them. "I never thought it would end like this," Dawn said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought we'd figure it out. I thought we'd find a way to fix things. But I guess I was wrong." Helena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. She had made up her mind, and Dawn knew he had too. The love they once shared was gone, replaced by a cold, insurmountable wall. "I guess this is it then," Dawn said, his voice breaking, a painful lump forming in his throat. He stood up and walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "It's over." Helena nodded, the tears falling freely now, but there was no anger in her expression, only sadness. "I never wanted this, Dawn. But sometimes love just isn't enough, and I think we both know it's too late." The words echoed in Dawn's mind as he turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind the woman he had once loved, the woman he had believed would always be by his side. As the door closed behind him, he felt a part of himself die, a part of his heart that he would never get back. As the story came to a close, Dawn realized that sometimes, despite all the love and effort in the world, two people could grow apart. And no matter how hard you try, some differences were simply too irreconcilable to overcome. The divorce, though painful, seemed inevitable. The days following the conversation were filled with an unbearable tension. It was as if the house had transformed into a battleground, every room, every corner a reminder of the love that once existed and the bitterness that now consumed it. Dawn and Helena had barely spoken since that night. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from a peaceful understanding. It was suffocating, like the air had thickened with resentment and sorrow. Dawn had left the house that night, needing space, needing to breathe away from the situation that had spun out of control. He spent hours at the local bar, nursing a drink and trying to clear his mind, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Helena's tear-streaked face. It haunted him. Every word she had spoken echoed in his mind, and he couldn't help but replay their conversation over and over in his head. He had tried to fix things before, but now it felt like all his efforts had been for nothing. She had moved on emotionally, and he couldn't undo the damage. When Dawn finally returned home, it was late, and the house was dark. Helena was still awake, sitting in the living room, her face illuminated only by the soft glow of the TV. She didn't look up as he entered, but the tension in her posture was palpable. There was no warmth in her greeting, only the cold, sharp silence of a relationship unraveling beyond repair. "You should go," Helena said softly, her voice almost inaudible in the stillness. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I think it's time we faced the truth. This isn't working. We've been stuck in this toxic cycle for too long." Dawn's heart sank as he heard the finality in her words. He had hoped for a different outcome, for some miracle where they could somehow fix what was broken. But now, standing in front of her, he knew that hope was futile. Helena had already made her decision. He stood there, frozen, unable to find the words. How could he argue with her? How could he convince her to stay when the damage was already done? She had moved on emotionally, and he was too late to repair the damage. The love they once had, the foundation of their relationship, had cracked under the weight of unspoken desires and unmet needs. "I'll pack my things," Don finally said, his voice hoarse. There was no point in staying in a place where he wasn't wanted. He knew that Helena's heart had already left, and he wasn't going to fight for a ghost of a relationship. As Don gathered his things, he couldn't help but feel the sting of loss. The years they had spent together now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the emotional wreckage of the past few days. He was leaving a home, a life that he had fought so hard to build. But there was no going back now. Their marriage, once strong and full of promise, was now nothing more than a broken shell. In the following weeks, things moved quickly. Helena and Don, both with heavy hearts, knew there was no other option but divorce. Despite the love they once shared, it had become clear that they had grown too far apart, and the wounds inflicted over the years were too deep to heal. Their conversations had dwindled to legal discussions, talks about dividing assets, and the logistics of untangling a life that had once been intertwined so completely. Helena had moved into a small apartment, a temporary escape that gave her some distance from the memories that clung to their old home. Don, meanwhile, took refuge in his work, throwing himself into his cases, trying to avoid the pain of his new reality. The divorce papers were drawn up, the lawyers exchanged emails, and the once intimate and cherished bond between them had turned into a cold, business-like transaction. The final decision came one afternoon in the lawyer's office. Don and Helena sat on opposite sides of the table, their eyes barely meeting as they signed the documents that would sever their ties forever. There were no dramatic outbursts, no tearful goodbyes, just a silent acknowledgement of what had been and what could never be again. Helena glanced up at Don for a moment, her eyes still filled with sadness, but there was no turning back. "I wish things could have been different," she said softly, her voice strained with the weight of the loss. "But I think we both know it was time." Don nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing left to say. Their marriage had come to an end, not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was a quiet, painful realization that they were no longer the people they had once been. The years of love and shared dreams had been overshadowed by neglect and betrayal, and there was no going back. As they left the lawyer's office, their lives were officially split. The divorce was final, and both of them were left to navigate their separate futures, each one carrying the weight of the past with them. Don couldn't help but feel a deep sense of emptiness, a hole where his love for Helena had once been. He had lost not only his wife, but a part of himself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this emotional journey through love, betrayal, and loss, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Stay tuned for our next story. And remember, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to new beginnings.